Hey there, good morning. So, yesterday we talked about Hagar and God seeing and hearing us. Today I have been studying more in Genesis 21. Hagar's story starts in Genesis 16, so if you want to watch yesterday's, it's there in the Jesus Bubble playlist that I started, and this morning we're in Genesis 21. So, first of all, God talked to Hagar about, well, let me go back. So Hagar has this incredible, powerful connection with an angel in Genesis 16, right? And then later, today in Genesis 21, Hagar and Ishmael are sent away again. Now this time it's different. She's not running away, they are sent away. So it's a completely different context. She's not fleeing, but still they are hungry, they're lost in the desert, and they're despairing, which is still a traumatic experience. They've been sent away after Isaac was born. And this is some years after Isaac was born, because Isaac grew up and he was about to be weaned. Oftentimes they didn't do that until the child was several years old, 4 or 5. At least Abraham prepared a huge feast. This is Genesis 21 verse 8, to celebrate the occasion. And Sarah saw Ishmael making fun of Isaac. And instead of dealing with it between the two boys, she told him to get rid of the slave woman. And he is not going to share the inheritance with my son, Isaac. Now, there's a whole ton of things that we could unpack in this, how all of a sudden Sarah completely reneges on the fact that now she has her own son, that she has zero affinity for Ishmael, who was the son that she wanted Hagar to have, that she pimped Hagar out in order for her to have a son for Abraham. So there's some serious disloyalty going on there, and she's forgotten what she's put Hagar through. But Abraham was upset because Ishmael was also his son, and it's understandable. He's the father of both boys. But God told Abraham, don't be upset over the boy and your servant. So this time, God says, look, I will take care of Ishmael. I will handle it. The first time that Hagar ran away, she was fleeing. She was running away from her own will. And someone asked me in a question after the video yesterday, why would God have sent Hagar back? Which is a great question. Back in Genesis 16, why would God have sent Hagar back into the abuse? Well, I want us to think about how the world was back then. Hagar was a foreign Egyptian slave girl who was pregnant by her master. She was not married. She was not someone who could be able to fend for herself. She was alone in the desert. So it sounds to our ears kind of harsh that God sent her back into the abuse in Genesis 16. But if you think about it from how much worse the rest of the world would have been around her, and how she might have been violated or taken advantage of in just as an escaped slave, there was very little likelihood that she would be safe and that her son would be able to be safe as well. And so I think personally that God may have sent her back for a couple of reasons. One, because being as bad as it was for her under Sarai, being Sarai's slave gave her the protection, and being pregnant with Abraham's son actually gave her an incredible amount of protection compared to what she would face as a fleeing servant or a fleeing slave. Being the mother of Ishmael also meant that after he was born, Ishmael was going to be raised under the protection of Abraham. And I think God was also looking out for her unborn child when he sent her back to Abraham and Sarai. So I know that it seems just awkward. Why would God tell her to go back to where Sarai was treating her so badly? Well, maybe God had some lessons in humility for Sarai, and maybe God was looking out for the well-being of her unborn child and of herself, because for the next several years, it seems that everything kind of calmed down, and Ishmael was raised. God had plans for Ishmael. Ishmael is the father of the Arab nation. God had plans for Ishmael and his future. Those plans would have been very difficult to come to fruition if he had been raised as the starving son of a runaway slave out in the middle of the desert. God had planned for Ishmael to become also a great nation. He gave that promise. And so Ishmael needed to be raised as the son of Abraham, and Hagar needed the protection of being the mother of Abraham's first son. So anyway, I think that God had some good things for Hagar and Ishmael in going back that were protected and providing for them his protection and provision, which is often, we see that hidden under the layers of God's heart, and under the cultural layers, we see God's protection and provision toward the vulnerable if we unpack these stories more. And we see it again in Genesis 21. So Hagar and Ishmael have been sent away, and they had been given food and water, and she wandered aimlessly in the wilderness, is what it says in verse 14. When the water was gone, she put the boy in the shade of a bush, and then she went down by herself and sat down 100 yards away. I don't want to watch the boy die, she said. So she's kind of dissociating here. And God's angel called to Hagar from heaven, verse 17, and said, Hagar, what's wrong? And you think, well, that's an obvious question. Duh, my child is dying. We don't have any food or water, and we're stuck out in the desert. Why are you asking me what's wrong, God? He says, do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying. Now, what was Ishmael's name? Ishmael's name is God Hears. That was the name that she gave him. God told her to name Ishmael God Hears when he met her at the well in Genesis 16. Go to him. God has heard the boy's cries as he lies there. Go to him and comfort him, for I will make a great nation from his descendants. Then God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well full of water. She quickly filled her water container and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy as he grew up in the wilderness. He became a skillful archer, and he settled in the wilderness of Paran. And God arranged for him to marry a woman from the land of Egypt, an Egyptian woman like his mother. Now, as we look at this, what I want to point out is that there is a generational connection with God here. Hagar named the well the God who sees me, the place of the God who sees me, because God sees. There were two questions that God asked Hagar. Where have you come from, and where are you going? And then she said, you are the God who sees me. And God told her to tell her son, to name her son, God Hears. And in Genesis 21, God comes back to her and Ishmael and says, God hears the boy. God saw the mother. He heard the boy as well. And so there is this generational blessing of communication. Now, again, I want to ask a question. How did Moses know about Hagar's story? How did Moses know to write Hagar's story? How did Moses know that Hagar had had two powerful encounters with the angels of God? How do we have this included about God coming and speaking to a slave woman and telling her, I hear you and I see you. You are important. You matter enough for me to show up. It's because she told her story. There's no other way except that she expressed this to other people. It became part of knowledge. She raised her voice about what God had done for her, an Egyptian slave girl. She had to have told her story. Otherwise, if that had happened in silence, we would never have known, because Moses wouldn't have known to write it. We have power that comes from God when we tell our stories. That's what I want to leave you with today. So if you have questions, I'm still taking ideas for a book of the Bible to go through. If you have questions or thoughts or comments, please discuss in the comments below. And also, I just want to let you know, check on my page, because there is a super awesome coaching discount that I'm doing, limited time only right now. And it's also on our website if you look at coaching discounts. But you can get 3 sessions for almost half off in a bundle with either me or wellness strategy or functional wellness coach Bren, or legal strategy coach Shelley. So all 3 of us have partnered together to do that. So if that's something you have questions about, drop me a comment below. I'll be glad to give you the links. And have a really wonderful